$45 trillion. Yeah, you heard that right. 45 trillion. According to historians, that is the staggering amount of wealth estimated to have been drained from the Indian subcontinent between 1765 and 1945. But here's the absolute wildest part about that statistic. The initial and frankly most brutal phase of this massive wealth extraction, it wasn't carried out by a conquering nation or a rival king or even a national army. Nope. It was executed by a private corporation. Which brings us to the central mystery of today's explainer. How exactly did just 24 wealthy London merchants sitting around in some dark room back in September 1599 manage to turn a simple trade mission into a ruthless 200-year hostile takeover of an entire subcontinent? I mean, how on earth did they conquer Mughal India, which, let's remember, was the world's absolute largest economic power at the time? Well, welcome to our explainer on the hostile corporate takeover of India. Today, we're going to map out the chilling life cycle of the East India Company. We'll trace its incredible transformation from this vulnerable, almost desperate little startup into a sovereign usurping juggernaut that quite literally rewrote global history. As you'll see, it's a story of how strategic diplomacy, bribery, and military force were weaponized to exploit internal divisions and systematically drain a nation's immense wealth. Here's our roadmap for this explainer. 1. A ruthless corporate startup. 2. Strategic diplomacy and footholds. 3. The turning point, Plassey. 4. Systematic drain of wealth. 5. The 1857 national uprising. And finally, 6. A cautionary historical tale. Let's get right into it. Section 1. A ruthless corporate startup, from spices to sovereignty. So this entire story actually kicks off with pepper. Yeah, black gold. When a foreign monopoly decided to hike up pepper prices in 1599, 24 furious London merchants pooled their capital together to form their own syndicate. They basically vowed never to rely on anyone else's supply chain again. Okay, let's dive into this, because it's pretty unbelievable. On December 31st, 1600, Queen Elizabeth I granted them a royal charter. But they weren't just handed a standard 15-year monopoly on trade. No way. They were granted these terrifying state-like powers. We're talking the ability to mint their own coins, make their own laws, run courts, and even maintain a private army. It was essentially handing a group of aggressive businessmen the literal powers of a king. Moving to Section 2, Strategic Diplomacy and Footholds. Market penetration. So after some pretty bloody, failed conflicts over in the Spice Islands of Indonesia, the heavily armed company retreated and turned their sights toward Mughal India. Realizing they absolutely couldn't just conquer it by force right out of the gate, they pivoted to cunning diplomacy. Check out how they built this web. In 1608, Captain William Hawkins lands in Surat, literally dressing up as an Afghan nobleman just to impress Emperor Jahangir. Now, that didn't secure trade rights right away, but fast forward to 1612, and a shock naval victory by the company against rival fleets totally won the emperor over. Then, by 1615, diplomat Sir Thomas Roe manages to secure a royal decree to build factories. They were slowly digging in. In 1639, they leased land in Madras to build a fortified white town. And get this, in 1668, they leased Bombay, a territory the King of England had literally just received as a dowry for marrying a Portuguese princess. Talk about a bizarre real estate deal. Section 3. The turning point, Plassey, the hostile takeover. Eventually, the company's appetite locked squarely onto Bengal. Now, in the mid-18th century, Bengal wasn't just a region, it was a global economic marvel, responsible for roughly 12% of the entire world's production output. To the company, this wasn't just a new market to penetrate, it was an absolute goldmine. But the true hostile takeover actually started with a simple piece of paper. In 1717, after a company doctor managed to cure Emperor Farrukhsiyar of a severe illness, the highly grateful ruler granted the company a decree that let them trade in Bengal completely tax-free. And this was the absolute death knell for local merchants. Think about it. While Indian businesses were burdened with heavy taxes, this massive foreign corporation paid zilch. Local businesses literally starved while company executives were back home building literal palaces. Naturally, the young Nawab of Bengal, Siraj-ud-Daulah, tried to put a stop to this blatant corporate abuse, which led to a massive military showdown in 1757 at Plassey, and this brilliantly illustrates the company's true playbook. See, Robert Clive only had a mere 3,000 soldiers up against the Nawab's massive army, but Clive didn't win with military might at all. He won with a checkbook. He ruthlessly bribed the Nawab's own commander, Mir Jafar, along with a wealthy local banker. So, when the battle finally started, the Nawab's army simply stood still. The company didn't fight for their victory, they bought it. Which brings us to Section 4, Systematic Drain of Wealth, Asset Stripping. Because after Plassey and their subsequent victory at the Battle of Buxar in 1764, the company pulled off the unthinkable. In 1765, they basically forced the Mughal emperor to sign a treaty that completely stripped him of his right to collect taxes in Bengal, Bihar, and Odisha. Just like that, a private trading corporation became the official tax collector for millions. Robert Clive set up what was known as the dual government, and it worked like a perfectly tuned, vicious machine. Step 1. The company violently collects taxes from the local Indian populace. Step 2. Instead of bringing in gold or silver from Europe like they used to, they take that Indian tax money and use it to buy Indian goods. Step 3. They export those same goods globally, pocketing massive corporate profits. It was a completely legalized cycle of theft. Indians were, quite literally, being forced to fund the theft of their own labor and goods. And the human cost of all this corporate greed? 10 million. It's a devastating number. In 1770, a horrific famine struck Bengal, but instead of stepping in to provide relief, the company actually hoarded grain. To protect their profit margins and ensure shareholder dividends didn't dip, they violently enforced their tax collections, even raising the rates during a famine. An estimated 10 million people perished, literal skeletons on the streets, all while the company was busy counting its record-breaking profits. Section 5. The 1857 National Uprising, Bankruptcy and Backlash. Look, you really cannot subjugate, bankrupt, and starve a subcontinent for a century without expecting a volcanic backlash. The systemic economic drain and those crushing taxes had pushed the Indian populace right to an absolute boiling point. The final straw was something called the Doctrine of Lapse, which rolled out in 1848. Under this policy, the company decreed that if an Indian ruler died without a biological male heir, they were completely forbidden from adopting an heir to take the throne. Instead, their kingdom was automatically annexed by the East India Company. So the crucial point is, this was just legalized highway robbery. This policy swallowed up entire states like Jhansi and Awadh, and it pushed the local armies and everyday citizens into absolute outrage. And this naturally led to fierce resistance from some truly incredible historical figures. Now, decades earlier, you already had visionary leaders like Tipu Sultan in the south, who famously deployed these innovative fire rockets against the company's forces before he died in battle in 1799. But by 1857, things exploded, sparked by reports of rifle cartridges greased with cow and pig fat, which was deeply offensive to both Hindu and Muslim soldiers. A massive national uprising kicked off. It was led by legendary figures like Mangal Bendi, the fierce warrior queen Rani Lakshmibai, who famously fought with her child strapped to her back, and so many others. It was a profound, somewhat fractured, but incredibly fierce push for freedom. Bringing us to our final part, Section 6, a cautionary historical tale. Nationalization and legacy. That 1857 uprising violently shook the very foundations of the company. By 1858, the British Crown had to step in and pass a new law, finally realizing that a profit-obsessed private corporation simply could not manage an entire subcontinent. The company was entirely stripped of its powers, and India was brought under the direct rule of the British government. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is the ultimate historical irony of it all. The mighty East India Company, right? This corporate behemoth that ruthlessly conquered nations, minted its own coins, and drained trillions of dollars of wealth, was eventually completely dissolved. And then, in 2005, the brand name itself was actually purchased by an Indian entrepreneur. So today, the East India Company is literally an Indian-owned brand selling luxury tea and coffee. Talk about coming full circle. In the end, history is really a mirror showing us where we went wrong. A single commercial entity used internal divisions and pure greed to orchestrate a 200-year hostile takeover of a global superpower. So as we look around at our own globalized economy today, with massive multinational corporations and all these complex trade agreements, are modern nations truly safe from foreign commercial manipulation? It's a heavy question, but definitely one worth asking yourself as you step back out into the modern world. Thanks for joining us for this explainer today.